actually done by the medical and mental health professional fields. And so I think that there is that perception. And I also think that there's very black and white thinking as far as like, I think we have this black and white thinking that like scary and strict is going to excel and win. And if you're not scary and strict, that means you're soft and you're coddling. And that's just not true. This is, there can be a balanced approach.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's really kind of an unfair shake to teachers that do practice proper communication and proper boundaries and respect, because I think they have a harder time getting people to believe in their classroom theories and the way they run their classroom, because in fact, I know this because I've witnessed it in my own experiences. But I think that there's this stigma with parents that the harder their teacher is, the better that teacher is. And I think that's really, it stinks, because it gives people that are trying to do the right things and operating their classroom in a respectful, healthy way, it makes their path a little bit harder, Before we dive into the questions, we're going to get into it here in just a minute, but I want to be clear that treating abuse survivors or abusers is out of Ashley's scope as a mindset coach, and people could instead be treated by an actual therapist. Ashley works with dancers on things like inner critic, self-regulation, stress management, limiting self-beliefs, all of which are a product of strict and scary environments. But if there is trauma, we always encourage therapy. Seek a professional licensed therapist. That's the right thing to do. Ashley also works with teachers on things like dancer and communication skills, teaching methods, their values, and how those values are reflected in teaching and behaviors, and also boundaries and setting boundaries. And what are those boundaries? In addition to coaching, Ashley's knowledge comes from years of seeing it in the dance world herself, sometimes experiencing it herself, as well as being a former court-appointed special advocate and behavior interventional specialist for children. So we want to be super, super clear about, Ashley's scope and where she's coming from throughout this interview, because this is such a serious, important topic. We always want to encourage therapy, though, for anybody that is on the receiving end of trauma. So Ashley, let's get to it. So this first segment, I want to start by saying this is not an attack on dance educators. I consider myself a dance educator. I know Ashley's a dance educator. It's very simple. When you know better, you do that. I said that at the top of this interview, and I stand by that. However, it's easy to get caught on autopilot in the dance industry. It is so easy. We are on that hamster wheel. There is no off season. We talk about that all the time on the show. There's no off season. And so we're always just kind of catching up and planning ahead, 2-3 months ahead for the next thing. And it's very unique in that way. And so when things get busy and chaotic, checking in with yourself, where's your head at, how you can do better is critically important as an educator working with children. That's why we're here. So I believe a majority of the dance educators in this business are in it for the love of dance and working with children. I don't believe dance educators set out to see if and how they can mess up a kid's life, right? Just like a parent is never going to be perfect, teachers are never going to be perfect, because we're human. We're all human, right? Yet there are crucial moments that happen in working with children that put us at a crossroads for how our relationship with our students is going to impact their lives well into adulthood. So do you believe that dance educators are properly equipped and supported to address the mental and physical issues that happen throughout the course of a child's dance years?
I think we're getting there. I think we're making some progress. I think even in the last several years since I've moved into this other side of the dance community as a mindset coach, I've seen a shift starting to happen, and so I think we're getting there. I think, again, like you've been saying, Bree, is it's education, and I think this isn't we're not trying to police dance educators. We're not trying to censor. We just want to fill that gap between the research and the education and our methods. And so this is, that's where we're coming from. But I think we're getting there, but I still think we have a ways to go.
Yeah, I definitely think that there's more resources now than ever. And I think the challenge is, how do we get people to know about those resources? Or I think more importantly, how do we get people to say, I'm going to spend money on this? Because money is a big thing, and dance is already so expensive. And it's almost like, you know, the more technique classes we can add, that's where we want to put our money. That's where we want to pay our teachers. Sometimes I think it's becoming more important that we talk about putting money in places that aren't going to directly affect your bottom line, but will ultimately affect the bottom line in the end, which is teacher training, teacher resources, teacher knowledge, certifications, things of that nature, because they exist. And I think getting people to place their financial importance on those things is where it's at. I mean, every other industry has that standard, right? So we need to have that standard. Where do you think the behaviors, the abusive behaviors come from an education standpoint? Because I said this and I still maintain, I don't think teachers set out to be abusive, right? Is it learned? Is it coming from stress? Where did those behaviors come from?
I think it's a few things. I think it's definitely what a lot of us have been modeled. You know, I think especially like when we look back into like the history of dance, there has been this mentality of like strictness and authority and just really unhealthy and abusive.
Oh, you froze, Ash.
Doing stuff, and I think that that's really hard to like self-regulate when you are always on the verge of burnout.
Yeah, 100%. And you know, I've seen this too, like when as a teacher, when you're in the stress of the moment of like, you know, everything you've worked for and all the time and energy you've poured into these kids. I know there were times that I got crazy, you know, when it got closer to competition, or, you know, coming off of a holiday when the kids show up and, you know, they look like they haven't danced before. You know, we've all, you know, and we're 3 weeks away from competition, and you're like, what is going on? So you start to lose your mind a little bit, and, you know, you're so invested because you know what they can do, you know how much you believe in them, and you know what you've all collectively worked towards. And so things start happening that don't normally happen with your mental, you know, the way things are coming out of your mouth. You're more irritable. And I think that also can contribute, don't you?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that plays a big part.
Yeah. So with no governing body and a lack of standardization, dance educators often grow up teaching the way they were taught. In many cases, the way they were taught is outdated. And we've learned so much since then about ways we can achieve better results in a healthier way. What is the most important thing for educators to remember when they're working with children?
Yeah, I think there's two things I really want to highlight. One is that children and teenagers are not adults. And so if you look at brain science, the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that's responsible for executive function, so decision making, emotional regulation, impulse control, predicting consequences, planning, right? That part of the brain is not fully developed until adulthood.
Yeah.
And so when we need to remember that, and we need to remember that these are not adults that we're working with, and that their prefrontal cortex is not completely developed. And that does not mean that we cannot have expectations and high standards, but it just means that we need to meet them as they are, children and teenagers. The other thing that I'd love to hit on too is that what we say to them becomes their inner dialogue. So one of the most common qualities of the inner critic, that critical, harsh voice that tells us like that we can't do things and that is really hard on ourselves, that is often inspired by important people in our lives. So whatever we are saying to our students is going to be internalized and then built upon. So we need to be aware of that.
Yeah, thank you so much. And what are some training tools educators can use to improve their communication with their students so that it is healthy and it is respectful, to get the end result they're hoping for and achieve without a negative, harmful impact on their students? Because I think often as educators, we feel like if we don't take this hard line, if we don't show them how serious we are, they're not going to get it, right? It's not going to click the same way. So what are some tools that will help with that?
Yeah. So a few things. I think if you are realizing maybe through this workshop or through anything else that you have experienced some trauma, I encourage you to reach out and seek professional help from a therapist, from a licensed mental health professional to work through that trauma, because it's important for you and it's important for your life. So that's my number one recommendation.
Well, and because to stop you, if you have trauma as an educator, you're going to cause trauma. That's the known thing, right? So I think it's really important for people to understand. They're like, well, I'm not behaving in this way. I don't have any issues. If that's you and you're sitting at home, we all have some level of trauma. So you need to examine, if you are getting snappy, if you are be able to have the self-awareness to go, maybe I have some things I need to work through too.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Another thing is self-regulation techniques can be really helpful. And so some deep breathing. I know that sounds like so cliche, but it really, really does help. Just like deep belly breathing. So like breathing into your belly, acting as if it's a balloon, breathing out. You can do this before you start teaching. You can make a practice of it every morning, whatever. And even just a few deep breaths is really helpful. Practicing mindfulness, grounding skills. And so if you start to feel yourself getting to that place as you're teaching, go to the bathroom for a minute and run your hands under the water. Pick something in the room and count everything in that category. So count all the lights, count all the mirrors, count all the jazz shoes you see, do something to ground yourself back into the present moment and out of that stress response that you are responding to.
Yeah. Thank you. That's so helpful. And, I also want to mention, and we're going to mention this probably a couple times in this conversation, but our friends at YPAD do an amazing certification for educators. We're going to give you a 25% off code at the end, and we're going to post that in the chats. But YPAD is Youth Protection Advocates in Dance. If you don't know about them, it's ypad.org. They're doing fantastic work to certify teachers to keep kids happy, healthy, safe, and dance. We now have certified YPAD conventions and competitions. So it's amazing work that they're doing. But as educators, I think it's because we don't have a standardization and a governing body, it's one of the best things that we can do for ourselves as educators to make sure that we're towing that line and that we're respecting those boundaries. Do you agree?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. YPAD is a great organization to get hooked up with.
Yeah, 100%. We're going to go on to segment 2 in a second. For all of you that are putting your questions in, I see you. We're going to get those answered probably at the bottom of this second segment. So please keep your comments and questions coming. And I'm Bree with Apollo. If you're just hopping on, we're live on Instagram, Facebook, and Zoom for Beyond the Steps. We're talking today with Ashley Mowry, who is a mindset skills coach, about how mentally abusive behavior by dance educators can impact our students. So this conversation is for educators, this conversation is for students and parents who need to understand what they're seeing and what they're witnessing and make sure you can advocate for your child accordingly. We all have a job in this way. So Ashley, you've been on the show with us before, and we approach these conversations on a fundamental level with the goal of education and perspective. What are the most common examples of mentally abusive behavior in the dance community you see happening from educators?
Yeah. So I want to give a trigger warning for anybody watching. If any of this does start to bring up some big feelings for you or trigger you, please take care of yourself. That's, our first priority is that you take care of yourself. And I also want to acknowledge, as we've said before, that these are often things that we were taught and that we saw our teachers do. And so no judgment. Lots of love here. Let's try not to be defensive or spiral into our own shame, but instead just be open to learning and growing. So a lot of the things that I see, I'll name a bunch, and then, we can go deeper into any that, any that you see, Bree, but name calling, embarrassment and humiliation, sarcasm, especially with younger kids. Younger kids don't understand sarcasm. And so that can be really harmful. Yelling or screaming, patronizing terms, shaming, guilt trips, jealousy, being territorial or controlling over your students, codependence on your dancers, with your dancers, blame, and gaslighting are the ones that I see often.
Yeah. 100% all of those. I'm not proud to admit I've engaged in many of them on that list. I'm sure my students would tell you that I have in the past. I've had moments. I've definitely also had my share of apologies in those moments, after those moments. So again, no judgment, no shaming, but we need to recognize that they exist to be able to move forward in a different way and create a different pattern of behavior for our studio cultures, for a healthier studio culture. So in your work, how, when you talk with students, when you work with students, how do these behaviors, you just named a whole list of behaviors by dance educators that happen pretty regularly, right? How does that manifest itself and affect students in the short term? Let's start with short term.
Yeah. So I'll add again that if I do notice that a dancer I'm working with for mindset coaching is experiencing chronic or extreme mental abuse by their dance educators or in their studio environment, I talk to them about that. I let the parents know, and then I refer and recommend them to therapy. And so I do want to note that. But short-term effects, they look like denial. There's often a lot of denial. This is your home. This is your studio. Confusion. Why is this happening? Why am I getting treated like this? Fear, not wanting to go to dance. So some avoidance behaviors, feeling ashamed of themselves, maybe isolating themselves, difficulty focusing and concentrating, moodiness, and then somatic responses in our body like tense muscles, aches and pains, and a racing heart.
So it can manifest itself in the student physically as well.
Absolutely. And this is, and a lot of this is too, not just from my observations, but from research from the medical field and from mental health professionals too.
Thank you. We have a question from Casey Cope Jones on Facebook. Can you please explain further what examples of codependency or gaslighting would be for dance teachers?
Yeah. So codependency, I think it can show up in a lot of different ways. One way that I see it is just this like this relationship that's crossing some boundaries for like student teacher, and not even, yes, definitely like in the extreme cases of sexual abuse, but even just in cases of just like best friends or like being dependent on each other or having to like rely on each other and like not being able to, like the dancer feeling like they can't leave the studio or the teacher is dependent on them. You have to be in this dance. I need you in this dance. Situations like that. And then gaslighting, I think, is really comes with when you try to bring something up to the teacher and it's met with, I didn't do that, or that's not what I meant, or oh no, I love you. That's not what I meant. I'm just being hard on you.
Instead of recognizing, I am sorry that I made you feel that way. And it just immediately, is that the best way to handle it? If you recognize or it's brought to your attention that you've been gaslighting as a teacher, what is the best way to handle it? So it's just boom, in that moment, it's taken care of, it's addressed, and there's no long lasting.
And I think taking accountability in that moment, and also like understanding that your students' feelings are valid. Like whether or not you agree with them, they are valid. Their experience is valid. And if that's how they felt in that moment, then we can meet them with empathy and say, and it's okay to say like, wow, thank you for bringing this to me. I wasn't aware that that's how you felt. But I could see that, and I am so sorry. And really validating their feelings and their experience with that.
Yeah, thank you. Now we talked about the short-term impacts and how that those feelings manifests itself in students. But when there's mentally abusive behavior from a dance educator, let's talk about the long-term. How does that affect students, and how do they manifest itself? How do those feelings manifest themselves in that student long-term?
Yeah, so long term, and again, this is taken from research from the medical field and mental health professionals, but they, in children especially, they can turn into sleep disorders or some form of regression. They can also develop into anxiety, depression, chronic pain. So again, it can manifest physically, insomnia, social withdrawal, and possible PTSD.
Yeah, which that comes with another whole slew of, complications in and of itself. Yeah. We have some questions here for you on Instagram. So thank you all for your comments and questions. We see you. Our first one is from Dancing Basilisk. How do I recover from a dance teacher that shamed anyone that wasn't skinny and made me feel like my thinness defined my worth? And I know you have personal experience with this issue. So I'm so glad that you're here to help with this.
Yeah, I do. I think, first, I'm so sorry that that happened. Second, I think I would really encourage you to seek some therapy with a mental health professional. I think that there's so much, like, that goes so deep, and body shaming goes so deep. And so I think therapy can be really helpful. I also think there's resources on Instagram that can be really helpful as far as Beauty Redefined, and their book can be really helpful as far as like starting to look at your, like, how you view your body and other bodies. But
well, and I know, and I know, Ashley, you're not going to say this, but you really need to consider consulting with Ashley, because this is exactly what she does. And she's been through it, so she has that perspective as well. But we're gonna tell you all how you can work with Ashley. She works with students, she works with educators, she works with organizations, and so there's a lot that she has to offer in terms of training and understanding and techniques that you can do with your students and classes. But I encourage anybody who's struggling with negative self-talk or leftover feelings from trauma to please do contact Ashley. She's amazing and does amazing work. If you're just joining, I'm Bree with Apala, chatting with Ashley Mowry today. We're talking about how mentally abusive behavior impacts our students long-term and short-term. This is Beyond the Steps. We want to hear. We're live on Facebook. We're live on Instagram and Zoom. We've had some amazing comments and questions. Please keep those coming, and we'll get those answered by Ashley by the end of the conversation. Ashley, before we go to the final segment, we have a comment from Jesse McKenna on Facebook that says, I had a professor who was verbally abusive. There's critiques and then there's criticism. Sadly, one of her unnecessary remarks triggered a colleague in recovery from eating disorders to relapse. She ended up in the hospital a few weeks later. Her remarks left a long-lasting effect on my psyche. Fortunately, the university took our end-of-term review seriously. The professor went on a sabbatical for the following year. I had a great second year in my program with a visiting professor who cared more about her students. That experience was so foreign to me based on my pre-college teachers, and it definitely shaped my teaching style. It made me hyper aware of how I correct students and speak with them in general. Thank you, Jessie, for sharing that.
Thank you for sharing that. I'm so sorry that happened.
Yeah. But I mean, that just goes to show, and kudos to you, Jessie, for being so self-aware and being able to turn that into a positive in the way you teach your students. I think not everybody's fortunate enough to have that reaction to it. So good for you. And again, thank you for sharing that. Ashley, we're going to talk a little bit. I hear this all the time in my conversations. I see it on Dance Teacher Network and all the other networks that are there. What do you say to people who argue, give me a break? We have to water everything down these days. These kids are so whiny. When I was growing up, my teacher and coach did such and such, and I turned out fine. These kids need to toughen up. Give me a break. What is your response to that? Because we hear that so much, and it's almost like I went through this, so you should go through this, because you need to be tough like me, and you need to go through it because I went through it. And it's like it's a badge of honor sometimes. Do you get that? Do you see that?
Oh, I see it all the time. I'm in those Facebook groups too. I hear it. And I do. I hear it, and I hear it from dance educators. And I think I want to say I understand, and I understand that change is really hard. But again,
Absolutely.
we have to look at the research here. There is a gap between our teaching methods and the research that's out there. Research has shown that even yelling can have lasting effects on children, including increased aggression. And a study a few years ago showed that yelling can be as harmful as hitting a child.
Wow.
So I think, with that, I think we just have to look at the research. And I also think that we have to remember too, and I want everyone to hear this, those teaching methods are not really getting the results you want or getting the results you think. Like when you're using those teaching methods, you're not getting respect, you're getting fear. And you also are often, and I'm going to say this too, because like Bree said, like I was a teacher for several years. I am not proud to say that, a lot of these things I definitely did at certain points. And I know now that when a student is taught in a scary environment, their threat response, their fight or flight response can be triggered. And when it's triggered in that moment, you're definitely not going to get the result that you want, because they're going to freeze, or they're going to fight back. They're going to, have attitude, or, get defensive, or they're going to walk out of class, or, whatever, or not come to dance, not want to come to dance. And so it's not going to get the desired results that we want, is another big factor of that.
Would it be fair to say that if you're, and I don't know, that's why I'm asking, but would it be fair to say, because we have behavioral challenges with students in classes all the time, would it be fair to say that we probably need to turn that finger around and look in the mirror if we're having behavioral issues with students and that are frustrating, that we need to really look at ourselves and go, are we triggering this response? Is something I said or is something I'm doing triggering this response? Would that be fair?
I think so, absolutely. And I think I think it could be a factor of things. I could think it could be a lot of things, but I think that's definitely a big possibility, is that like the environment or the how you're saying things or what you're saying is creating this problematic behavior, or at least contributing to it. And again, like no shame, no guilt, no judgment, but just start to be aware of that and start to see, like, how am I contributing to this situation?
Well, and it's such a light bulb moment for me hearing, just having this realization and having this conversation, because I think back to being in the classroom, and for me it was triggering, and maybe triggered the yelling, or it triggered some sort of intense conversation I had with the kids because of behavior. But then looking at, did I go back and look at what they were experiencing with their other teachers that day? Maybe something I had said 3 weeks ago, or they had happened to them in class 3 weeks ago, is now surfacing 3 weeks later. It would have been so helpful to understand this then, to be able to go back and go, okay, before I come down on them, before I have this conversation, I need to go back and rewind the tape a little bit and look at what has been going on.
Absolutely. There's always roots to behaviors, right? And so there's always like underlying causes. And so I think that's really, really important. And Brie, you made me think of something else that I want to mention too, is that I want to mention that you said, we as educators can often get triggered in class, like students are late, or they're coming unprepared, or they're talking too much, or, all these things. And I totally get that. And one thing that is really helpful that I've learned through coaching and through this work is that sometimes when we are triggered in those situations, often it's because one of our core values is being dishonored. And so it can be really helpful to get really clear on our core values as a teacher, or on our individual core values as an educator. And I have an Apollo blog from a few months ago that is about that. And it takes you through a whole exercise to set your values, but just even being aware of that, like being able to have some language and understanding about like, Katie came in late today and I'm fuming. And that's why, because one of my core values is you know, respect of other people's time, or you know, something along those lines. So yeah, I just wanted to mention that too.
I'm putting that sound bite in the chat because I think that is so important. When we feel triggered when we feel triggered as educators, it's because often one of our core values is being threatened. That is so true. I'm putting my time into this. I'm sacrificing so much personally to be here with you. I'm giving all of myself and you're not giving enough. Those are all things that are normal that we feel as educators all the time. That is crazy.
Yep. And those are okay. And those are okay to feel and to think. Like and you as a dance educator and as a human are allowed to have those thoughts and those feelings. It's just then we have to have a pause button so that we don't teach from that place and we don't respond from that place.
Absolutely. Thank you. And thank you all. We have a comment. Bree Lackamy on Facebook says, such a great awareness. There's a difference between fear and accountability. That really struck a chord with her. Thank you for your comment, Bree. And then we have another comment from Kay Cope Jones on Instagram. What do you say to teachers that say, my kids know I love them? It's tough love.
Yeah. It is a common one. I think that can be pretty nuanced, and I think I believe that you love your students. I'll start there. I believe that you love your students, and but I also believe that we have to look at the research and look at how we are affecting these kids. Even if we do love them, we can still be causing harm.
100%. I know I've loved every single one of my students over the years and love them like many times like they're my own. But it doesn't mean that I still didn't do things that were harmful. It doesn't mean as a parent that I'm not doing things that are harmful to my own kids, because we said that at the time. And I love my kids. I would do anything. I would die for my kids, but I'm not perfect. We said that at the beginning of this hour. As humans, we're gonna make mistakes, and it's recognizing, that's a question. So obviously we're not perfect. We're not going to react from a perfect place. There is no such thing as perfect. We need to understand that as human beings and stop putting that pressure on ourselves. But does an apology in the moment, if you're like, oh my gosh, and I'm big on this with my kids, is apologizing, immediately apologizing. My husband and I really try to do that. If something is wrong, we apologize to them. Does that undo a lot of the potential long-term damage in that moment? If you can, and I'm not saying like, if you don't mean it, don't apologize.
Right.
It has to be genuine. It has to come from a genuine place. But does that relieve some of the impact?
Yes and no. I think yes. I think apologizing is so great. And I think again, there's like this older, outdated mindset of like, don't apologize to kids, but I think that's outdated. And I think that all the current research shows that yes, it can be really healing to the relationship. But I also think if every single class and rehearsal you're apologizing, it's time for some inner work. Right. Like we've got to
just be the answer. I'm gonna flip out and then apologize after and like case closed. So like that's not. Okay. I understand that. Thank you. So we'd be remiss in having this conversation without addressing what's happening right now with Simone Biles withdrawing from the team competition and now the individual competition at the Tokyo Olympics, citing she's having a mental block. She's having mental health issues. She's getting so much support, and rightfully so, because she's really stepping up, putting herself first, and normalizing the conversation about mental health, which we all need more of. And I know, Ashley, you're doing that in your work as well. So thank you. But are you surprised at the backlash that she's receiving over it? And what does this say about our culture, that this attitude that the win should come before the person? What are your thoughts on all of it?
Yeah, yes and no is my answer. Like, I was surprised at first to see some of the backlash, but then when I really thought about it, I was like, no, that tracks. Like, that's where we are still as a country, and we still have, a long ways to go in normalizing this. And I think, Simone is the role model that we all need for this. I think the courage that it had to take for her to do that. Like,
Oh,
I just think, I mean, so much courage. And I just hope that this is showing athletes and dancers and everyone that it's okay to take care of yourself, and you don't have to put yourself at risk for winning or for a medal.
Yeah, thank you. It's certainly the reason I'm bringing that up is because it certainly translates to what we see in the dance industry all the time, right? Is like
Yes.
sacrificing our mental and physical health for the sake of that competition or that medal or that trophy or whatever.
Yeah.
And yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and we're teaching our dancers when we do that, we're teaching them to not listen to themselves. And we're teaching them to not listen to their bodies and to their minds and to not trust themselves, which can have lasting impact. And so I think it's so amazing that Simone, throughout the last few years and what she's been through, it looks like she's listening to herself, and it looks like she's trusting herself to make these decisions for herself. And I think that is just really courageous.
Yeah, 100% agree. And bravo, Simone Biles, wherever you are. Just setting an example for people all over the world. So thank you. We have a question before we get to the last segment, because this is kind of going to get a little bit deep here. Melissa Brunstring on Facebook. Do you think there's a relationship between abusive teaching and lack of pedagogy? I find some of the instructors I've observed being on the abusive side lack the education to get their students where they want them to be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say there's a connection. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
I think so.
We talked, we talked, and if you're just joining, this has been a long conversation. We talked about a lot in the beginning of this conversation, but it goes back to kind of what we said in the first segment, which is, there is a lack of standardization. There's no governing body. It's very much you do the way you teach the way you are taught kind of thing. And unless you actually make it a priority to spend the money and seek outside professional development and training, which there's great work being done, but it's very limited pockets, right? There's not a lot you can do unless you seek it out, unless you're willing to pay for that experience yourself. And so I think that is where a lot of the problem is in our industry. And Melissa goes back to your point about, yes, it is a lack of education, but where is that education coming from? Because there is no governing body, right? So we have to get it ourselves. But I would agree with her that in the cases of it either takes somebody extremely self-aware to be able to put themselves in check, no matter where they got their education or their training from, or 9 times out of 10, it's somebody who did not get adequate training in that way, that professional level training. So okay, so if you could say anything to these segments of people if they're witnessing abusive behavior in the dance studio, let's start with educators, directors, studio owners. What is one thing that you want to say to them about witnessing or engaging in abusive behavior?
Yeah. So I think, and I'm going to say this for everyone, is like, you can always, if it's severe and chronic, that you're witnessing it, always, you can look into your local and state laws and look into like reporting it to where, depending on where you are, like CPS or DHS. So that is always an option that you have. And so know that, you can look into that. Otherwise, I think, for educators and studio owners, if it is outside of your studio and you're seeing it, there are places that you can report it. The Dance Safe on Instagram, you can anonymously report any type of abuse to them, and they can get you hooked up with resources and support, or they can use that information to help people get resources and support. If it's at your studio, I think if you're the studio owner and it's one of your teachers, I think this is a conversation a very serious conversation to have, and to say, I believe in you. I know that you love these kids. This is, what I'm seeing. This is the effects of that. Let's make a plan of what we can do here. We're going to get YPAD certified. We're going to do some education. We're going to do this and see what happens. And if it continues, I think we got to start cutting ties with if it's severe and chronic. Like I think that it's just we can't put our kids at risk.
I love that you said all of that. Yes to all of that. But I want to come in on the back end of that and say, look, that is not easy.
No,
It is
at all.
pit in the stomach, heart sick, because really in a dance studio, the staff becomes like a family and
Yeah.
they become your family. And if you're a director, a studio owner, the person responsible for staffing, I know as a director for me, I 100% got behind my staff because
Yep.
they are responsible for creating and building that program.
Yep.
Their techniques and the way that they train is absolutely critical to a good program and to
Yeah.
building a foundation for a program. Yet at the
Absolutely.
same time, when you are not in that room and you hear things from parents and students, you're not there to witness it, but this person with all your heart, them, they would never do anything. They love their job. They love what they do. It can be very, very difficult and challenging to look at
Yeah.
that family member and that person and that friend and say, I love you. And I know you love this and I know where your heart is, but this
Yeah.
is not okay.
Yep.
And
Yep.
drawing that line in the sand is probably one of the more challenging things that you could ever do.
Absolutely. And I think it's so hard, Bree, and I think you're so right. And I think we can have these conversations with a lot of empathy. And I think, I was really lucky. I think if you're seeing little hints of these things and you're seeing, some yelling and some shaming and it's there, but it's not severe. I think a conversation a lot of times can just be really helpful to open this dialogue. And I think a lot of teachers, just a conversation would go, oh, wow, I didn't realize that's what I'm doing. And I was really lucky in my really early teaching years. The owner of the studio, who is now one of my dearest best friends, she was such a mentor to me, and um, she approached me, and I still remember vividly like where we were, and she was like, "Hey, like, you hear like how you're saying certain things and what you're saying sometimes, like." When the students forget their choreography or come in not knowing it, like, do you know how you're responding? And I kind of was like, no, like, how am I responding? And, I didn't even realize or I did, but I didn't realize what how harmful it could be. And so I'm so fortunate that very empathetic conversation happened. And I was able to then really look at things and see, okay, this is where I could grow as a person and as an educator.
Yeah. And I know you mentioned having a conversation, but sometimes, and I know I have to say this really quick because we have to go, but sometimes having the conversation, you think that's the end of it. But if you continue to have students parading through your office and
Yep.
there's red flags all over the place, and it's just, you have to take a deeper look, especially
Yep.
listening to this conversation today. Now you have to do something about it. And again, I wish I would have had these conversations when I was in that director's seat. It's not an easy job, but I definitely would have been helpful. What would you say to the dancers? There's this, we talked a little bit about this. There's the line of the culture of respecting your coach, respecting your director, your teacher versus respecting yourself, right? We're bred to toe that line of respect from dancer to teacher. They're one of the most important figures in our life, like you said earlier.
Yep.
But you number one is you, right? And making sure you're protecting yourself, your peace, your health, your happiness.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know it's so hard, and I know we're taught this, skewed sense of respecting our teachers so often. And I think that you can love your teacher and still be hurt by what's going on, and still you deserve respect. And so I think reporting it to a safe adult immediately, like if it's happening to you, if it's happening to one of your teammates, or you're seeing it at competition, whatever it is, I think getting a safe adult involved, whether that's parent guardian, whether that's, your studio owner or another teacher, I think and continue that, like say, don't let them brush it off, and continue.
Yeah. Well, and I want to say, because I've had this happen with students, is that if you're a student out there, I know we have them listen all the time. If you're a dancer and you're engaging this, or you feel like you've been mentally abused or triggered in some way, and you're afraid to say something about that teacher because that teacher may be mad at you or upset with you, or it might get them in trouble, that is a sign that something bad is going on, and that's why you need to report it, right? Because if you're having those feelings about anybody that's educating you, that's a problem in and of itself.
And if you tell somebody and there's retaliation from that teacher, that's another sign, and you need to get out of that environment.
Be removed. Yeah. You need to be removed from that situation. 100%. I really think that's important because, and kids who are afraid to talk to, and I know kids have such a hard time communicating verbally because we're in this like text message DM society, right? Where it's getting harder and harder for a kid to look an adult in the eye and express their feelings or have clear communication. And if that is something that's hard, don't sacrifice your feelings because you're just scared to do it. Tell your parent, tell somebody that can help you and that can communicate it for you. Because I know so many times kids are afraid to, no matter how many times I said, I have an open door policy, come and sit down and talk to me. It will be private and confidential. Kids would sit down and try to have a conversation and just break into tears because they don't know how to get it out. So encouraging that open door policy and no matter where it comes from, just encourage them to talk about it. And then last is their parents. The parents, we constantly want to shove the parents away, right? Like I don't want the parents involved. I don't want the parents in the room. I don't want the parents, weighing in on what's going on. And yes, that's valid. All of that is valid. I've been there. I get it. But talk about the line. Again, they need to respect the director as the director or the teacher or the educator, whatever, the coach. But also they're the number one advocate for their child and their child's mental health and knowing when to step in. So what do you want to say to the parents?
Yeah, I think the parents, I want to say, I know this is so hard. I know none of this is an easy decision. I know having these conversations, bringing this up with the studio is never easy. I know if you ever have to leave a studio because of this, I know that's not easy, especially if you feel like they're getting excellent training. I get that, or if they're at, a well-known studio, I understand that, but I do, just like Bree said, you are the number one advocate for your child and their mental health and well-being, and this is important stuff, and this is going to affect them for years to come. And so I think, taking this seriously and having those conversations with the studio owner, with the director, with the teachers, and then also being ready to move on if it is not improving.
Yeah, thank you. So that's a great segue. We like to give homework, right? We like to take action. We like to, now that we've had this conversation, what are we going to do about it? So what is one action you want to have our listeners and our viewers take between now and next week to make progress in this area? What can they do right now?
Yeah. So I think, as you said earlier, Bree, we all have different roles that we play here in this dance community. And I want everyone to think about your role in the dance community and ask yourself, what is one thing this week that you can do to advocate for this change, right? You've heard this, you have this knowledge now. What is that one thing? If you're a dance teacher or a studio owner, is that hooking up with YPAD this week and getting on that? Is that a teacher, is that looking at your teaching methods and making one change right now, or reaching out for help or support? Parents, is that, looking at the environment that your student is in and making sure that they are in a safe and healthy place? So one thing, and I always say you are the, you the best. And so what you can do. So ask yourself, what is one thing you can do to advocate for change this week?
Thank you. Thank you so much. We're also going to encourage you to take our STEPS initiative course. It is completely free. And you can go to it from the link in our bio. If you're here on Instagram, on Facebook, I popped the link for the course in the chat. This is a a course series that's going to tackle topics like anti-racism, gender inequities, sex abuse and prevention, psychology, nutrition, and of course, dance medicine and science. It is a go at your own pace. It is completely free, and it's not everything you ever need to know, but it is a great jumping off point, and it's education and resources for you to dig further on your own. You can take that now and again at your own pace, completely free. It's the STEPS initiative course, and you can find that at apolloperformance.com. Again, also put that link in the website. We mentioned this several times in this conversation. Get YPAD certified. Our friends at YPAD.org are doing amazing things. That's Youth Protection Advocates in Dance. We have a 25% off code for your teacher certification. That is an amazing discount. So please, please, please use that. It's Apolla, all caps, APOLLA. 25 is the code. And I put the link to get to the YPAD course as well. So you can register and get that done. It's perfect timing for the new season. I also want to, Ashley has a seminar coming up where she's going to be presenting various topics for dance educators to boost confidence in their demeanors and in themselves. And Ashley's actually going to be presenting on body confidence. Ashley, when is this happening?
Yeah, so this is next weekend, and it is Dr. Chelsea Parati's The Confident Dancer Summit, and it is a free online conference for dance educators, and it is 15 industry experts on all different topics of how to develop body confidence in your dancers and in yourselves, and I will be presenting on body confidence. And so I think Bree is going to drop a link if you want to register. It's totally free. And then you can also choose to upgrade to the all access pass, which would give you lifetime access to all of the presentations and then free bonuses from the presenters. And it's some really great stuff in there. So don't miss this opportunity for some extra education.
Yeah. And, I always say this, I don't mean to be aggressive about it, but it's seriously so frustrating when you put out these free resources, because I know money is an issue. I know everybody has limited, money doesn't grow on trees. And I get that. I understand that. But there are so many free resources. If you just dig, there really is no excuse. We just gave you 2. There's a free conference next week that you can take. We just gave you the link. There's a 25% off code, on your YPAD certification, which is, if you look at it, professional development, it's a tax write-off. And also we just gave you a STEPS initiative course. There is no excuse. We're taking away the excuses, and we want change to happen. So please, please, please share this, pay attention to this. This is open to anybody. Share in all your networks, and make change. That's how we're going to be better in this area. Yeah. Ashley, tell everybody how they can follow you, work with you, consult with you, whether they're, it's for their group, whether it's for an individual, their dancer or a teacher or an organization. How can people work with you and find you?
Yeah, so you can find me on Instagram at ashley.mowry.mindset. You can find me on my website at ashleymowry.com. Mowry is Mowrey. And I work one-on-one with dancers and dance teachers in mindset coaching. I'm a certified life coach and use all of that to work with dancers. So we do it virtually. So wherever you are, I can work with you. I also do workshops for studios, companies, and groups. And so if you're interested in having me, I do it for dancers, I do it for coaches, I do it for staff members. Basically whatever you need, I can make it happen. And so, and then I also am a blog contributor for Apollo. So every first Thursday, look for my blog that comes out. And then I will also be at Embody Conference, the new dance convention coming. And so they are bringing mindset skills to the convention setting. And so that's at the end of August.
Love that.
In Connecticut. So you can find them on Instagram, Embody Dance Conference.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ash. Thanks for all the work that you're doing. I said this time and time again, but we have an opportunity to restart, refresh, rebuild after an incredibly challenging year of reflection. 2020 is behind us. Hopefully we see a normal 21-22 dance season. We know what we need to work on. So let's actually do the work, shift our priorities, and and put the dancer before the dance, right? That's what the goal is going forward. The recording of this full episode and all of our episodes will be available on Facebook at Apollo Performance. And if you register to join us on Zoom, you'll get a recording of every episode, every single week emailed to you. We ask you to please share so we can get the word out and affect real change. We are booking right now for experts and episode topics for the fall. So if there is anything you want to know more about, anything you want to talk about, hear about, or if you want to be one of our guest experts, please message us at Apollo Performance on Instagram or Facebook, Facebook and Instagram at Apollo Performance, or email us info@apolloperformance.com. I've linked all of the resources we mentioned today in the comments on Facebook. I will also put them in the description of this IGTV when we save it there at the end. Thank you, Ashley, for joining us. We always appreciate having you here, and thank you for your time today.
Yeah, thank you, Bree, and thank you, Paula, and Beyond the Steps. I'm so happy to be here, and I love sharing my Friday afternoons with everyone.
We're so proud of all the work I mean, it's just been so fun to see you just kind of like just blast off in the last couple of years.
Thank you. Yeah, you all have like seen the progression of the last few years, and so I'm super thankful. Yeah, I think I'm coming up on maybe 2 years writing for you all, and so that's really exciting.
You were just starting when we met you, and it
was in early stages.
Yeah, it's a testament to you and just how much the work you're doing is needed in this industry. So thank you. Melissa will be back next week, Friday, August 6th, and we're chatting with Vanessa De Leon from Self Reclaimed about how we can foster survivorship in our studio environments. And that's survivorship as it speaks to sexual trauma as opposed to victimhood. We want to embrace survivorship mentality in our studio culture, and how can we support that as if we haven't been through that trauma. So another really incredibly powerful conversation. Join us next week. Until then, I hope you continue your journey beyond the steps. Have a great weekend, everybody. Thanks, Ash.
Bye.